Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's hearing. We're going to hear further from Mr. Dowden in just a moment when he's down at the hearing room. Good morning, Mr. Dowden.
Good morning.
Mr. Bennett.
Good morning, Mr. Dowden.
Good morning.
I want to begin this morning, if I can, by thanking you for your assistance in giving evidence to this inquiry over the last 2 days, and again during today. Not only has it been very valuable evidence to the inquiry, I want you to know that, but I know it's at times been very difficult for you, as it would for any watch manager in your position. My questions are deliberately intended to be searching, and you have, if I may say so, shown great courage in coming here and answering them in the way that you have. And I hope, we hope, as the inquiry team, that the firefighters who follow you to give evidence to this inquiry will follow your example. Can I also just say something else? I am going to be going to questions during the course of this morning, as I did on Monday, which are based on National Policy GRA 3.2. When I do that, and if I do that, I just want to be clear with you that I don't expect you to have read and be familiar with the policy document itself as a document. And my questions would be based on the principles contained in them as they would apply to you, and not the policy document itself.
Okay.
And I just want to repeat for the record that none of my questions today or hereafter are intended to assume any kind of familiarity with policy matters above their pay grade, if I can put it that way. Is that clear?
That's clear, yes.
From me.
Thank you.
Can I start by going back over a couple of things from yesterday on the subject of wet rising mains. Now, first question is this. If Grenfell Tower had had a wet rising main and not a dry rising main, would that have made any difference to the speed at which you, as the first appliances arriving, could have got water into the compartment?
I mean, as an initial crew, we were very, very quick anyway. I was really, really proud of the way that my team on that night made that compartment entry from the time of our call. But having said that, if we didn't need to augment water supplies within that building, yes, then the speed of our access into that compartment making an initial entry would have been quicker.
Yes. And is that the normal experience, that where you've got a wet rising main, provided the pump is working, that you can access compartment fires much more or more quickly than you could if you had to plug into a dry rising main?
Correct. I must just add though, if that system is operable, as I've referred to earlier, 6 weeks prior we did have some challenges at Trellick Tower with the wet riser, but generally, as a rule of thumb, it will increase our time, decrease the time to make a compartment entry, yes.
Now, you said, and forgive me, I'm going to go a little bit more quietly, as you can probably tell, I'm not very vocal today, so bear with me. You said yesterday, in an answer at page 70 of the transcript, that it would be very difficult to get water pressure the further up you go the building. And that was in the context of plugging hoses into dry rising outlets at every level. Can I just ask you this? Even if you were doing ordinary compartment firefighting in a single compartment, using 1 or 2 hoses in accordance with the practice you told us about yesterday, but you had to do so on floor 21, 22, 23 of Grenfell Tower, so above 50 metres, what would the water pressure be like up there? given that you only had a dry rising main?
I've not had any personal experience of using a dry rising main at that height, but the theory would suggest that yes, the pressure would be lower because of the increased height and also the size of and the distance the water has to travel. There will be effect from the frictional loss, so the water pressure would be affected. Yes, at the higher you up to go to the property. Yes, that's correct.
Right. And at around 60 or so metres, what would that pressure be like?
I wouldn't be able to put a figure on it, but it would be significantly reduced.
Given what you told us about the number one rule about not committing firefighters into a fire compartment without water, would the fact that you had to attack a fire in a compartment at a height of above 50 metres using a dry rising main affect your firefighting strategy?
In theory, it would, but on the night it didn't. We still committed on that night. Put firefighters into a risk area without firefighting media to save life.
So in simple terms, how would it affect your strategy if you had to put out even a simple compartment fire on the 23rd floor, say, of Grenfell Tower?
You'd have to make contingency plans for that. It would be very difficult. There is a process where you can put intermediate pumps, which are a very small pump called a lightweight portable pump, and you'd have to put that at intermediate points through the stairwells. That is a time-consuming process. We also can use an aerial appliance as a sort of a mock dry rising main on the outside, but again, you're still going to have the same issues in terms of trying to increase that water pressure at the upper floors. So that's why, as of 2006, any buildings over 50 metres should be fitted with a wet rising main.
Yeah, and just digging a little further, this small pump that you referred to, would that be standard kit that you take on a run, or would that be something you have to...
No, it's a non-mobile special. That's on request only.
Request only?
Yes.
Where would you request it from? Do you know?
That'd be via brigade control.
Right. Are they kept in all fire stations around London, or in any specific locations?
No, only specific. I wouldn't be able to tell you what stations in London have those, but they are held at specific locations within London. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go back, if I may, to the chronology of the night and make pumps 15. Now, according to the LFB short incident log, we have make pumps 15 as a message timed at 01:27:59. Does that correspond with your recollection, roughly, of the time at which you made pumps 15?
Again, I can't reference it exactly to that time on the night, but the only reference I have is looking back through the vision mobilising system, and so that would be a correct time.
Okay, well, perhaps I should just give you that document. It's bundle tab 23. If you turn in that, to page 17, you can see that at 01:20, at 01, in fact on there it's 01:24:34, make pumps 10, and then if you go a little bit lower down, you can see, go over the page, I think actually we need to go over the page for this. If you go to 01:27, there it is, it's at the bottom. Do you see it says RUP G271, make pumps 15, make aerials 2. Does that reflect the message that you sent or asked to be sent to brigade control?
That's correct.
And just so I'm clear, I should have asked you yesterday, RUP stands for what?
I'm not sure of that, what that actually stands for, if I'm honest.
Okay. Well, I've seen references to it in some of the evidence as being an incident upgrade. Would that be?
Yes, that's correct then, yeah.
Right, okay. Let me ask you, who made the decision to make up the pump numbers to 15?
From my recollection, that was from me on the incident ground.
And did you discuss that decision with anybody?
The only discussion that would have been was my request to, again, I believe at the time, firefighter Dan Bills, who's my driver, to that message to be sent.
Now, in his witness statement, which we'll explore with him, Mr. Secret says that when he left the tower to get his BA set on, he came up to you and asked you, what have you made it? You said 10, and he said, I would make it 15 to 20 because it looks like we're losing it. That's what he's put in his witness statement. Is that what you remember?
I don't remember speaking to Chris Secret on the external of that building. No time I remember any traffic with Chris was when he was up at the bridgehead, and the traffic we had at that point.
Okay. Would you look at your witness statement, page 5, please, in the middle of the page? And you can see there that just below the middle of the page you say, at 01:28 hours, I sent a further assistance message requesting that the incident was made pumps 15, as I noticed the fire rapidly snaking up the decorative V of the east side exterior. You see that?
Yep.
My question is, had it been doing that before that moment, or was that the first time that you saw the fire rapidly snaking up the decorative V?
I can only recall that that's my recollection of that visual image of it making its way quite rapidly up that part of the building at that point.
And when you say decorative V, do you mean the column?
The columns that I think there was 4 columns on each elevation, and that's, from my recollection, where it was rapidly travelling up to roof level.
You used the word snaking. Could you just describe, perhaps in a bit more detail, what you mean by that?
It just seemed to be in one part of the building, in particular that V shape, just very progressively making its way up that. I didn't understand what it was or what part of the building it was, but yeah, it just seemed to be rapidly moving on that part of the building in itself.
Yes. But the transcript won't have picked it up, but you made with your right hand just now, a left and right movement.
Yeah.
Is that right? Was that what the fire was doing, moving from left to right, like a snake?
That's from my interpretation of how it was travelling, yes.
So not straight up, but laterally each way?
Not big lateral movements, but from my recollection, that's how that fire travelled up that side of the building at that time, yes.
Okay. Had anything changed in the 3 minutes from the time that you ordered pumps 10 at 01:24:34?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yes. Had anything changed in the 3 minutes that had gone by between ordering pumps 10 and ordering pumps 15?
I think the only thing I believe I can reference that to my statement was another decision for that make pumps 15 was at that point I did start to have a clear memory of people exiting the block. I think it was from the sort of emergency exit on the east side of the block that, from my mind, had been subject to smoke inhalation.
Right. Okay, I'm going to ask you about that topic in a moment. Before I do, can I just ask you, did the sheer, let me put it more neutrally, did the speed of the increase in number of pumps, say from 10 to 15 in 3 minutes, tell you anything about the seriousness of the fire you were looking at?
I think at that point I was already under a quite stark illusion that this was a very, very, very serious fire, something that I've never witnessed up to that point of 14 years of service within the London Fire Brigade, just due to the way that this fire was escalating on the external facade of the building.
And was the increase in the need for pumps from 10 to 15 in a matter of 3 minutes or so something that you had ever experienced before?
No, and that's not remote from the 10 to 15. I'd say from the point I made pumps 8, from then on in, I've never really seen that rapid increase in resource, and I've never been in an instant command where I've had to make that rapid increase in resource before.
Can I ask you to look back at a document we looked at yesterday, Mr. Dowden, which is the note of the PRC meeting of the 3rd of July 2017, which you'll find in tab 24, Mr. Trial Director, of the documents bundle. And if you go to the 3rd page of the manuscript, which I believe is page 7 internally of the relativity reference. Yes. You can see the makeups on the left-hand side, MP6, MP8, MP10. And at MP10, you say it was going to be difficult to fight. But beneath that, you say at MP15, this was a pivotal change. Multiple residents leaving, rapid spread of, I think it says outside. It's not your handwriting, so I don't know. It looks outside. It's like outside. It's the word pivotal change I want to just focus on. Could you just explain what it was that was pivotal at that moment?
I think for me it was the thing I can reference to in terms of a pivotal change was at that point I realised that potentially there were people involved, because at a similar time and very simultaneous, I think when we sent pumps 15, I made persons reported.
Yes. Let's just explore that a little bit if we can. If you go back a tab to tab 23 and look, please, at the short incident log at pages 17 and 18. I'm sorry to ask you to look at 2 pages, but page 17 at the bottom is the time at which make pumps 15 was messaged, 1:28:14. You've seen that a moment ago, coming from DR in the control room. And then over the page, at page 18, we can see 01:28:47, make up IUP G271, persons reported. So it looks from this as if the persons reported message at least came back from the control room to the incident ground after confirmation of pumps 15. Can you just help me with the precise chronology, if you can? It looks on this as if, and these are messages, of course, coming from the control room to the incident ground. It looks as if the confirmation of persons reported came after the confirmation of pumps 15. Do you think it was that way around, or do you think it was a different way around?
Looking at the log, it's seconds, 30 seconds maybe, and at that point in time on the incident ground, that's a very, very short amount of time, and I do remember at a very similar time that the pump's 15, and I'm remembering that I could see people coming out I remember, if I'm honest, there was an adult male and his son who I believe came out from the emergency exit on the East Block, who had clearly been subject to smoke inhalation from what I could see. And I was under the illusion that went, if not at the same time.
Right. Okay, just to finish off the line of questioning on the timing. I mean, in your experience, is it possible for messages which are coming back from the control room to the incident command pump or the command unit to take a little bit of time to come back?
To confirm that they've received that message?
Yes, sorry, I asked a bad question. Yeah, exactly.
There will be some delay because the traffic will be sent by the instant ground, and that will be received, and they'll confirm that back. So there'll be some time delay.
Yes. So when we look at those two messages in particular, they're confirmations back from the control room. They're not messages being sent to the control room from the incident.
That's correct. Yeah.
So the pivotal change you're talking about, I think this is right, is that it was the way the occupants in the building were behaving rather than the way the fire was behaving. Is that right?
No, I'd say a combination of both. It was the increase of the fire spread, but as we spoke about before, the primary role of the London Fire Brigade is to save life. So as soon as I became aware that, from my point of view, instant commander, I could see that people were subject to smoke inhalation. That's a big change.
Yeah. Can I ask you to look back at the PRC note under MP15 on page 6 of the internal LFB note. I'm sorry, my fault. 7, page 7. So under at MP15, we've discussed pivotal change, multiple residents leaving. And at the bottom there you say, I was at Shepherd's Court, 20 firefighters, only went a few floors, no previous experience. Could you just expand on that?
I think, as I spoke about before, I was present at Shepherd's Court. I wasn't on the initial attendance, I was on the make-up, wasn't at the real dynamic stages of the incident. Didn't play a key decision role or an instant command role on that afternoon. And from my understanding, yes, it did travel up, but not at the same scale and rapidity it did at Grenfell Tower. And that was obviously very different in terms of how that incident was approached, because crews, from my understanding, were able to fight the fire from the internal to the external because there wasn't the same increase and rapidity in terms of external fire spread.
Mm-hmm. When you mentioned Shepherd's Court at the PRC review, which was on the 3rd of July 2017, so a couple of weeks or so after the Grenfell Tower incident, was that the first time you remembered Shepherd's Court, or did you think about Shepherd's Court earlier than that?
I think it would have been earlier because I would have obviously had to prepare some notes going into that PRC.
Did you think about Shepherd's Court while you were on the fire ground at Grenfell Tower on that night? Did it come back to you?
As I sort of spoke about before, when you are, no one else has found themselves in before in the UK Fire Service, in that moment in time, you do not necessarily have the moment and the time to reflect on specific incidents, but what you do draw on is your past experiences that come out and help you to try and make some decisions that night. So I don't remember having a conscious thought about Shepherd's Court, but because it's very instantaneous, very dynamic decisions you have to make, then that certainly may well have been part of my experience I would have drawn on.
Just going back to the message, persons reported, that message came from you, did it, initially?
I do have a recollection of instructing Dan Bills to send persons reported, yes.
Right, so you said to Danny Bills, who was the driver on 271, I think, send a message, persons reported.
That is correct.
And he
yes.
sent that message to control.
As far as I understand, yes.
What does that message mean, or would it mean to a control room operative?
It basically allows the control room operative, if there's any other officers, senior officers remotely monitoring the incident, that we now have, from the incident commander's assessment, people within a premise or property that are unable to leave by normal means.
And in terms of your approach to fighting the fire and rescue, search and rescue, did that have an effect on your strategy? Knowing that you had to send that person's reported message.
Could you just repeat that question for me, please?
You sent the message persons reported because, as you've just said, there were people who might not necessarily be able to get out. Did that fact, the fact that they might not necessarily be able to get out, have any effect on your strategy of firefighting or search and rescue?
I would say not at that point, because at that moment I would say that the plan that I'd implemented, in terms of what I knew was policy, what I knew was correct at that time, my previous experience, I was confident that we could still move on and try and resolve the incident successfully.
Going back to the page that's on the screen under MP15, you say, all my experience now gone out of the window, in quotes. Very daunting moment. I felt helpless. Is that how you felt at that moment on the night?
There probably was moments when I did feel helpless. It's a very, very difficult place to be, isn't it, as a commander, when it's just relentless. We can usually try and control and get a grip on the dynamic stages of an incident, but this was like nothing else I'd ever experienced before. The ferocity, the way that the fire was developing, it was just relentless.
And at the very bottom of that entry you say, or rather you're recorded as saying, maybe more experienced officers coming on. The word maybe might suggest that you weren't sure. What was the position? Were you confident that there were going to be more senior officers arriving imminently, or were you just not clear in your own mind?
I don't think that was referring to the night. I think I had time to reflect before this PRC, and I've had some searching moments in terms of whether I was the most experienced officer and right and proper officer of that night, because I've got some fantastic colleagues around me in London Fire Brigade who are very, very experienced in what they do, who came on that night and assisted me greatly. So I think that's more to where that statement was alluding to.
And this is a repeat of a question I asked earlier, but in terms of earlier make-ups, but would it be normal procedure for a watch manager to be in charge of a fire at 15 pumps?
No.
And the call for 15 pumps, who would that normally be made by in terms of rank?
Again, we have discussed this, as a watch manager, any officer can make that call. Any officer can ask for what resources they need in terms of what their assessment is on that fire ground or incident ground at that time. There is a justification to that within the PRC process, but as an incident commander and officer, you are given that authority.
Yes, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think that the make-up policy, the London Fire Brigade make-up policy, says that the call for 15 pumps should be normally made by a DAC, Deputy Assistant Commissioner. Have I got that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you would normally expect a Deputy Assistant Commissioner to take over incident command at 10 pumps, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah. And he would have an assistant commissioner as a monitoring officer at that level of pumps.
Correct.
So, is it right that in the normal course of events, when you arrive at 15 pumps, you should have had, well, much more senior support on the ground, and in fact shouldn't have had incident command at all, according to normal procedures?
In procedures and in normal, expected circumstances, and I think that just tells a story in terms of how unprecedented this event was, how quick the external envelope of that building was compromised, the way that fire just, as I say, it was relentless, and I think the way that the make-ups were so quick and so fast tells a story.
Having seen what you'd seen and then sent the message persons reported, as we've seen from the short incident log, did you have any thoughts at that time about what fire survival guidance should be given to 999 callers by control who found themselves unable to leave?
That's a difficult question. Fire survival guidance is when the occupant of that building believes that they cannot leave safely. And we spoke about the procedure and the resources that will attract. To then change that advice to a resident who feels that they cannot leave that property safely because of the products of combustion, fire, heat or smoke, that's really, really tough call to make.
Standing away from Grenfell Tower at the moment, just looking at normal practices and procedures and your experience, let me see if I can get at this. If you send a message, persons reported in a high-rise tower block, what would you normally expect control room operators to do with somebody who is calling in circumstances where they are one of the persons reported?
There's two different, we need to sort of clarify this. The persons reported will come from the incident commander. So if from in my information gathering or from my assessment of that scene, I believe to be persons within that premise that there's been persons involved, I will send that message. That's not necessarily something that comes to control. That will be from the incident ground. Right. Okay. The only time that potentially the control operator will have an interaction with any person within the building or premise where the incident is located is when they make a 999 call to our control room operator and they believe that they are trapped and they cannot make their way out of their property safely because of a fire. So the persons reported will be from the incident commander to control to say that I believe, as the incident commander, we have people within that building.
Yes, so that I follow. So the message comes from you,
yep.
Persons reported. What would you then expect the control room to do in terms of the advice that they would give in the normal case to somebody who calls, who is a person reported?
If we're referring to the fire survival guidance procedure, they will ask a specific set of questions in terms of their location, the numbers of persons at that location, the proximity to fire if known, conditions within that compartment, if it's heavy smoke, light smoke, and any additional information in terms of the orientation of the building if they know where that is. If they're, say for Grenfell Tower for sake, that the compartment or their flat looks over the east elevation Grenfell Road, because that's their key piece of information, and then the control room operator can pass to the fire ground, and then we can allocate our resources accordingly to that individual flat compartment or individuals who believe they can't leave.
Okay. So the sending of a message, persons reported, by the incident commander to the control room, would that or wouldn't that automatically trigger a change in the advice being given to a resident who did call, so far as the stay put policy was concerned?
No.
Or stay put? No.
Not from my understanding, no. Can I just clarify that?
Yeah.
That will only ever change. The incident commander, it's not something that's necessarily changed on the fire ground. That would have to go into control, and that would be the operations manager within control, who's in charge of control at that point in time. And that will have to be agreed between the incident commander, the operations manager, and that will have to be logged, because that will go outside and step outside and national operating policy for control room operatives.
Right, so I think, as I understand your evidence, what you're actually telling us is that the change to any standing stay-put advice in relation to a high-rise block would be a combined decision between the incident commander and the person in control of the control room.
That's how I understand it, that's correct, yes.
Right. At the moment when you sent the person's reported message, did you have any thoughts about how that might result in a change to the stay-put advice that would otherwise ordinarily be being given by the control room operators?
Not at that point, no.
Now, at this point, you've ordered 15 pumps, which were then going to be oncoming. Of course, the earlier pumps are nearer to the fire ground, and some are already arriving. What did you think you were going to do with all these appliances when they arrived?
I think and I don't mean to use it as simple as to try and get as many people into that tower as we can, as BA wearers, to perform as many rescues as possible.
Now, you mentioned smoke inhalation a little earlier on, and that's a topic I'm now going to turn to. Are you all right to continue?
Yep.
Thank you. That's very good. So you say you noticed a number of residents, and I think this is in your statement, actually. If you go back to your statement at page 5, if you look a little bit below, it's a line below where the reference to pumps 15 is, you say, I noticed a number of residents that had been subjected to smoke inhalation exiting the block from the east side. Their faces were blackened, and they had apparent respiratory difficulties in that they were coughing and spluttering, but they were making their own way out at that point. You say the east side. In retrospect, do you think you meant the east side, or do you think you meant the main entrance?
There was two entrances. Well, there's a main entrance on the south side of Grenfell Tower, from my memory, but there is also an exit on the eastern elevation of Grenfell Tower.
And you noticed that they had blackened faces, and you say they were coughing and spluttering. What did that tell you about the smoke condition of the lobbies and stairs inside the building?
They were had smoke or carbonaceous environment within that compartment or area.
And what did that tell you about whether compartmentation internally within the tower was holding up?
I don't have a recollection or recall me thinking at that moment in time that compartmentation has failed. I think we spoke about it yesterday in high-rise firefighting, due to how we set up, and from the one floor below, and the stairwells can be compromised, and potentially residents can be exposed to smoke inhalation in stairwells because of those areas can be compromised by internal firefighting teams. As I say, I can't remember at that moment in time or that point I had a conscious thought that a total failure of the internal compartmentation of that building had occurred.
And I know it's difficult to try to piece it all together given the dynamic situation at the time that you faced, but did you, when you saw the effects of smoke inhalation, did you have a thought as to whether the smoke that they were inhaling and being exposed to had come from their own flats or from smoke in the lobbies and the stairways? Is that a distinction you made at the time, do you think?
I didn't have that distinction, no.
Can you remember roughly how many people you noticed? You say in your statement a number of residents. Can you recall now roughly how many?
I think I need to maybe clarify. There was a number of residents. There was a gentleman and his son that I particularly remember that I could see that had been subject to smoke inhalation, and they seemed to be have respiratory difficulties. I do remember a number of other people in the sort of same vicinity area, but those two individuals stick up quite clearly in my mind. And
okay. But a fairly small number at that stage, as far as you can recall.
I would suggest so, but I wouldn't be able to confirm that.
All right, thank you very much.
And the next question, I think, is whether the fire was in their flats or whether it was in the lobbies or the stairs. The smoke was in the lobbies and the stairs. What did that tell you about whether the fire was still contained within flat 16 or whether it was now breaking into other compartments up the building?
Could you just repeat that for me, please?
Okay. And the fire was either in the smoke that they were suffering from had either come from fires inside their flats or in the lobbies and stairs. Either way, what did you think? Did you think that the fire was still contained within flat 16, or had it spread internally through the building?
I don't remember having a conscious thought in terms of this has spread internally beyond the compartment. I think because I was so consumed in terms of what was happening on the external of the building with the fire spread. I don't remember having a conscious thought or a decision in terms of how it spread internally beyond that compartment.
And seeing people coming down with sooty faces and coughing and spluttering, did you have any thoughts about the feasibility of evacuation?
I can't remember at that time, but I've had time to reflect, and I know it's not at that moment in time, but again, it's going to. At that time, we had a lot of BA teams internally. It's just for me, isn't it, as Commander, looking at it's the challenge that we would face, and almost the impossible situation of trying to evacuate that building at that time with the resources in attendance, is something that I still search for today.
And the question which I think I need to ask you is, at that moment, seeing residents coming out of the building, coughing and spluttering, suffering from smoke, is there a reason why you didn't immediately get onto the control room and have a conversation with them about modifying the advice being given to callers within the building?
had no thought at that moment in time, but from being an ex-commander on that fireground at that moment in time, being witness to what I was seeing happen and unfolding in front of me, I was never operated at that level before, and I was making decisions and to the best of my ability with all good intent and to try and successfully resolve that incident, and that's a decision I didn't take at that time.
Mr. Chairman, we're going to go on to another topic, but it is only 10:20, and I'm not sure I can cover the next topic in 5 minutes.
We could have a short break at this point. Would that be convenient to you?
For Mr. Dowden to have a short break.
Might be good to have a break, Mr.
Yes,
Dowden. Yes, all right. Well, we'll take a short break now. We'll come back and start at 10:30 by that clock. Please? Thank you. All right, we'd like to leave us. All right?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Millett?
Mr. Dowden, can I ask you to be shown tab 24, page 7 of that document, which is again the PRC review record with the manuscript writing. And at MP 15, you see we've looked at the words there. This was a pivotal change, multiple residents leaving, rapid spread up outside. And then it says, was halfway up building and now getting into flats. When you said that at the 3rd of July meeting, was that something that you remembered later, or is that something that you can recall was told to you on the fireground on the night at that point?
I can't remember that. At the point, the time I was incident commander, being given information that was getting into the flat, so whether that's something, obviously, between the time of the incident to the time of that PRC, that's something I reflected on or had further information on, I don't remember or recall having that information at the time I was incident commander, no.
So this is a reflection you had after the night, but before or at the meeting on the 3rd of July, is it?
I'm not saying that is the case, but I don't have a recollection of it being incident commander on the night. I don't have a full. Obviously, that was noted down in the PRC. That's a difficult question for me to answer, and I can only assume that I didn't have that information as incident commander on the night, and that was something that was reflected on between then and the PRC.
Do you have any reason to think that at Pumps 15 you weren't told that the fire was halfway up the building and getting into flats?
Yeah, could you just repeat that question, please?
Do you have any reason to think that at Make Pumps 15 you weren't told that the fire was halfway up the building and getting into flats?
No.
So you might have been told that?
I may have been told that, but that's nothing. I don't have a recollection of that account, and that's not something I refer to either in my contemporaneous notes, which was done very soon after the incident, or I haven't referred to that into my statement.
Right, thank you. Supposing somebody had said to you, or you had thought, right, this is now out of control, there are persons reported, I must change the fire survival guidance advice, and I must evacuate the building. At this point in the night, 1:28 or so, if that had been your thought, and I know this is a hypothetical question, Mr. Dowden, how would you have gone about that task?
That's a difficult question to answer. I don't think I can answer that honestly because I wasn't given the opportunity on that night with the benefit of reflection. That's a difficult question for me here to pose that in terms of relation to that incident.
Do you think it was possible at that stage to undertake a full-scale evacuation of Grenfell Tower?
The way that Grenfell Tower was just constructed, with that one central staircase, the number of residents in that block, the number of firefighters entering, the equipment, how distressed people are, confused in that environment, it's very, very difficult.
And if you had decided to adopt a strategy of full-scale evacuation, can you give me some kind of idea of what you would have needed in terms of firefighters and equipment at that moment?
I can't comment on that because that's something I've not had experience of. And it's a hypothetical question, and I really don't want to talk about my recollection of that night, what I did and my actions.
Now, at 1:29:46, the short incident log records that you made pumps 20, or rather, the call to make pumps 20 was confirmed by the control room. And we can look at it in the short incident log if you go back to tab 23. And at the top of page 18, we could see the timestamp 1:29:46. Service request created IUP G271, make pumps 20, FRU times 2. And that's a message coming back to the fireground from the control room at Stratford. Yes?
That's correct.
And so you would have sent that message, is this right, from the incident ground to Stratford before that?
That's correct.
Do you remember? Maybe you don't, but was it long before that or a matter of seconds?
I don't have a time scale on it, but it would have been seconds or a minute at most, I believe.
Now, if you could go to your statement and look at page 5, please. And look at the bottom of the page. You say, the last paragraph there, by the time I had made the incident pumps 20 at 01:29 hours, requesting 2 additional fire rescue units, the fire was on its way up to the top of the building. Now, the first question is, what prompted you to go from 15 pumps, which had been called at 1:27 or thereabouts, to 20 pumps at 1:29 or thereabouts, a mere 2 minutes or so later? What has prompted you to go from one to the other?
I remember at that point there were oncoming officers. Watch Manager Paul Watson, I do remember having a conversation with him along the lines of he presented himself to me as all oncoming officers would do to the incident commander. And he asked, what I resourced it to, and at that point I believe it was make pumps 15. Paul Watson is a very, very experienced officer. He's been in the London Fire Brigade for, I believe, nearly 30 years at a range of busy stations. So for someone like myself, I look up to officers like that. And I had not been involved in something of this scale up and 15 pump fire. I hadn't been involved or had to make up a resource up to that point. And I will be honest, it was from advice from Watch Manager B, Paul Watson. He believed this was a 20 pump fire, 20 pump incident. So I would gratefully receive that information because I was very, very much under pressure at that moment in time.
Yes, and how long had Watch Manager Watson been on the incident ground? Do you remember?
I can't remember how long he'd been, but I do remember he did present himself to me.
Right. And we can check. He came from, I think, Golf 361 Hammersmith's pump ladder.
That's correct. He's the officer in charge of the Red Watch at Hammersmith.
Right. And again, a similar question to the one I asked before the break. At 20 pumps, what did you plan to do with all these extra pumps when they arrived?
Very similar to before. It was a matter of we needed resources in terms of BA to enter the tower to help perform rescues.
If you could be shown, please, tab 24, which is the PRC notes, and just to look at page 7 of that. You can see at MP20, you say that I was advised by MP20 experienced WM Paul Watson. I valued his opinion. I didn't have a plan for how to utilise all appliances. So, not having a plan for them, well, let me ask you, did you in fact have a plan for what you were going to do with all these appliances?
But there was, my plan and my structure was still in place. The plan hadn't changed from the original in terms of having the bridgehead on the second floor, committing BA into the internal of the building. I think in terms of I can't say that. I think it'd be unfair to say I didn't have a plan at all, because there was resourcing. We had crews committed, and I did have a plan in place at that moment in time.
And what was that plan so far as it went?
At that moment in time, I remember tasking Paul Watson when he presented himself to me, because obviously we did have a number of resources in attendance at that time. It's not good practice to send everyone up to, particularly in Grenfell Tower, to the bridgehead on the second floor, because they are quite small lobby areas. I remember tasking Paul Watson to manage a staging area of resource in terms of BA wearers, and that was to facilitate the ground floor level within Grenfell Tower. And he was to liaise with Watch Manager O'Keefe at bridgehead level to feed BA resources as and when necessary up to Watch Manager O'Keefe. So that would be, I would take that as my plan moving forward.
So, in terms of the emphasis of your plan at that point, would it be more on committing BA wearers into the tower to do search and rescue, or would it be on firefighting? Or both?
I would say both.
Both. And in terms of firefighting at that stage, what was the plan?
I refer back to the principles, the priority and the primary role of the London Fire Brigade is to save life and to extinguish fire. And from my experiences, training and everything else, that that was a plan to save life and extinguish fire.
And is it, I think, the case that, and I'm going to put this to you in a leading way, but correct me if I'm wrong, that the London Fire Brigade mobilisation policy 412 requires an assistant commissioner to take command when the pumps exceed 15 in number. Have I got that right?
I believe so, that's correct.
Let me correct that. I think it's 16 in number, in fact.
16 plus.
16 plus,
Yes.
yes. So that's what I meant, over 15. Right, thank you. Going back to your statement at the foot of page 5, you say the fire was on its way to the top of the building at that point, so 129. Do you remember how close to the top it was at that stage?
From my memory, if not at the top, very close to.
Do you remember having any thoughts at the time about what the fire might do when it got to the top?
Not at that point, no.
And at that stage, 129 or so, did you have any thoughts about what fire survival guidance called advice should be given to 999 callers by the control room?
I'd say at that point I was still working to the stay put policy because of my previous experience, and I've not been in a position before where I've ever had to make that decision or change that advice.
Yes, I understand. Did you, at that stage, and I know it's difficult to remember, did you have any thoughts at the time about whether that stay put advice continued to be safe advice for control room operators to give to residents calling?
Everything that I've previously experienced and everything I've understood as an incident commander, yes, if a building doesn't fail.
Yes, if the building doesn't fail. Did you have any thoughts about, at that point, whether the building had failed?
Not to the extent of what I know now, no.
Did you have any thoughts about to what extent the building had failed? To any extent?
Not to the internal, but it was obvious something was happening to the external of that building.
Did you think about what might be happening to the internal part of the building?
I can't recall at that moment in time, no.
I'm going to summarise, if I can, where we've got to and ask you a number of very short questions. They're questions that I know we've covered before, but I want to see if I can tidy them all up at this point. So we've got to 1:29 on the night. Can I summarise your evidence? I'm going to put it to you as I understand it, and you can tell me whether you agree or disagree. You're still incident commander, despite it being a 20-pump fire.
That's correct.
You've seen the fire progress from the compartment in flat 16 up the exterior to the top or near the top of the building in less than 20 minutes.
That's correct.
People you've now seen coming out, coughing and spluttering with sooty faces.
That's correct.
You've gone from make pump 6 at 1:13 through 8, 10, 15, and then 20 at 1:29, which you've told us is a degree of increase in pump makeup that you had never experienced before. Is that right?
Correct.
You say in your statement, and it's a little bit later on, we haven't gone to it, but the jet on the outside of the building wasn't having much effect.
That's correct.
And as you said in your statement, and again I haven't taken you to it, but it's there, large chunks of falling, flaming debris were falling off in quantity from the outside or the exterior of the tower. Correct?
Correct.
And you were still calling for further resources, as we know.
Correct.
At that moment, did you think, or did you have any thoughts about how you were going to bring the fire under control?
My only reference to that can be that I know in my statement I've referred to it in I made a decision when the first FIU crew presented themselves to me that I know I requested make pumps 20 FIUs 2. When we make a resource request for make pumps 8, we get an FIU on the part of the PDA, predetermined attendance for that. So at that point, when that, I think his name was Crew Manager Phil Wigley from Paddington's FIU presented himself to me, I was still thinking I could extinguish this fire because I tasked them to go to roof level, set up a line-ups arrangement, which is a safer working system at height, and try to extinguish the fire from roof level. I mean, again, I was trying to make decisions that I thought, with all good intent, that would successfully resolve this incident.
Can I just explore that last answer a little bit more? You tasked Phil Wigley from Paddington to go to the roof level and set up a line. Phil Wigley from Paddington, is that the FRU or was it a pump ladder?
No, that's the fire rescue unit.
Right. And what equipment does the fire and rescue unit have?
They don't carry any firefighting equipment. They have specialist extended duration breathing apparatus sets. They have specialist rescue equipment, whether that's water rescue. They have mass decontamination equipment for firefighters, and they also have specialist cutting gear and rescue equipment for road traffic collisions, and also the capability to provide a safe system of work when fire crews, particularly fire rescue unit crews, are working at a height.
And in terms of the instructions that you gave to Phil Wigley, first of all, do you remember from your recollection what time, let me try and get at it this way, when do you think, at what pump level, in terms of makeup, did Phil Wigley's crew from Paddington arrive?
I wouldn't be able to give you a time in terms of makeups when that was.
And when he arrived, can you remember what instructions you gave him?
As I've detailed, he presented himself to me. At that point, I believe the fire was on its way up to or at roof level. I detailed him to go to roof level with his FRU crew to set up the line-ups arrangement and to try and facilitate some kind of drencher system utilising fire brigade hose to try and extinguish the fire from the top of the building.
What did you know about the layout and of the roof of the building and its access?
I didn't have that information at that point, no.
Did Phil Wigley follow your instructions?
At that point in time, I believe that was the case, but from what I understand, that actually didn't happen.
Did he come back to you and say, I can't go or I'm not going?
Not when I briefed him at that time, and I didn't receive any radio traffic to suggest that he didn't.
According to an operational response review produced by the London Fire Brigade, Paddington's FRU, which is Alpha 216, booked status 3 at the incident at 1:35:18. So that's, in fact, even after make pumps 25. Does that help you with your recollection of when Phil Wigley arrived and you gave him the instructions to go to the roof level?
Again, I wouldn't be able to confirm that as the time, but if it's on the incident log, then that would be correct, yes.
And how did you think Phil Wigley would get up to the roof with his crew?
Using the internal staircase.
And at that time, did you have any information about the condition of smoke in the internal staircase which would allow you to assess whether it was safe for Phil Wigley and his crew to go to the roof?
Not that I can recall at that moment in time, but I felt as the incident commander, I had a professional but a moral obligation to try and do something. I was operating way outside of my comfort zone. But I felt that I had to do something, try to think of something.
I understand entirely. And do you know how, well, let me ask it this way. When did you first discover, having given him the instruction to go to the roof level, that he couldn't or wouldn't go?
I can't remember at any point during that incident, until I left that incident ground, that became apparent to me.
Did you, at this stage, make Pumps 20 give any consideration to seeking to have the incident declared a major incident?
No.
Was that something you had authority to do?
I would have authority to do that. Generally, that would be facilitated by a more senior officer, but as an officer of London Fire Brigade, I have that authority, yes.
Was there a reason why you didn't think of making a declaration of major incident?
None other than I was just totally consumed by everything that was going on around me in terms of resources, sensory overload.
And at that stage, in the light of everything you saw and knew about the fire and the condition on the interior, occupants leaving, did you have any thoughts at that moment about the wisdom of continuing to, or allowing the stay put advice to continue to be given to occupants of the building?
Not at that point.
We're now going to move to make Pumps 25, which will be a short topic, I think. According to the short incident log, the message Make Pumps 25 gets confirmed back to you on the incident ground from control at 1:31:48. Service request make up, and for the reference, you don't need to go to it, but it's page 18 of tab 23, the short incident log. So that's a matter of 2 minutes after you'd made pumps.
Could I have a break?
Would you like a break? Of
Yes,
course.
please.
You'd like a break?
Yes, please. Just 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Of course, of course.
Of course.
Would you like it a little bit longer, Mr. Dowden? Would you like a little bit longer?
5 minutes is fine.
Very good.
Sure.
Yep.
All right. Well, you leave us now. We'll be back at 11:05. But if you don't feel ready to come back, send me a message and we'll extend it. Mr. Millett, as you will realise, Mr. Dowden is finding this very difficult. And I think that we really ought to try and break it up into sections of about 30 minutes.
Yes.
So what I suggest is he's coming in, I think, just a moment. We'll be starting again roughly 15:15. Let's run until 11:45 or thereabouts.
Yes.
We'll then have a slightly longer break so that people can, if they want to, stretch their legs, have a cup of coffee. And then we'll take it from there. And I think we might perhaps have a slightly longer than usual break for lunch. Would that be sensible?
I think that would be very sensible.
And is that going to enable you to finish your questioning before the end of the afternoon?
It will come what may.
That'll be all right, will it?
Unless anything arises that I hadn't anticipated, then that will be all right.
Thank you very much. Well, that's what we'll do then. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Dowden. Now, just so that you understand how we're going to run this now, we're going to... Mr. Millett's going to question you for another, let's say, 30 minutes or thereabouts. Then we'll have another break, probably a slightly longer break, and we'll keep the sessions quite short as we go on until it's finished. All right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Dowden, we then come to make pumps 25, and just to tell you what we have in the incident log, that was confirmed back to the fire ground by control at 1:31:48. Could you tell me how that decision was made to make pumps 25?
I'm at the base of the tower. I can't be specific in terms of the orientation where I was or where I was standing, but I know I was at ground floor level outside. I had a conversation and met firefighter David Badillo, who I believe had been inside the tower. Again, he requested in terms of the resourcing level, said that we'd made it pumps 20. And I think to that he reacted in terms of we're going to need more. From my understanding at that moment in time, I didn't have anyone else. I was conscious I didn't want to leave the fire ground. I can't remember seeing firefighter Dan Bills, so it was a case of tasking firefighter David Badillo to send that assistance message for me. I'm going to be honest, I can't remember if I gave him direction to make pumps 25, or whether that was a decision I left in the hands of firefighter Badillo to make. Firefighter David Badillo is an experienced firefighter. He's been at North Kensington for a very, very long time in his career, and he's experienced a range of complex incidents. At that point, I felt very much under pressure, and I didn't feel that it was right for me to leave the incident ground and send that message myself.
Did you have any discussion with firefighter Badillo about what you would do with the 25 pumps, what strategy you would adopt with another make-up of further appliances?
I don't recall a conversation of that type, no.
Can I just ask you to look at, again, your PRC notes, tab 24, page 7. And there you see, at MP25, FF Dave Badillo at G27, he had fear in his eyes, valued his view far more. I was well outside my comfort zone. Can you just describe for us what you saw in Dave Badillo when you say here, as you do, he had fear in his eyes? What was the atmosphere between you?
One of complete astonishment in terms of what was unfolding. I mean, I'm sure if anyone had looked at my eyes any time during that incident, when I was incident commander, I had the same look.
That's very fair. At about this point, 1:30 or so, Mr. Batterby says, Firefighter Batterby says that he came out of the tower and came over to you to update you. Do you remember that?
I do remember seeing crew manager Charlie Batterby at some point outside, yes.
Do you remember what you discussed with Charlie Batterby, if anything?
I didn't at that moment in time, but obviously since I've had a discussion with Charlie Batterby, yes.
What do you recall now standing there about the discussion you had with Charlie Batterby?
From my recollection, again, it was what the incident was resourced to. And from my memory, at that moment in time, we hadn't had an aerial appliance in attendance, if I understand, if I'm correct. And from the conversation I've had post-incident with Charlie Batterby, I detailed him to remove some road bollards that would be blocking the access for the aerial appliance.
Right. Did Charlie Batterby tell you about the conditions inside the building?
Not that I can recall.
Did you find anything out from Charlie Batterby that you didn't already know at that point?
I can't remember if that information was surrendered, but I do remember Charlie saying to me that when he looked at me, I had a similar expression on my face to the same as Firefighter Badillo. A state of shock.
Do you remember, were you in communication with the bridgehead at that point?
I can't remember.
What were the conditions like on the outside of the tower in terms of what was happening on the ground?
At that point, trying to recall what the conditions were like on the external and particularly on the ground, that's a difficult memory to try and recall, if I'm honest.
Okay. Let me see if I can give you a prompt. Do you have any recollection about falling debris at that point?
I have a memory of falling debris from the tower. Whether it was at that exact moment, I wouldn't be able to confirm.
And what about crowds? Do you have a memory of what the crowd situation was outside the tower at about that point?
Again, throughout the time at my time at the incident, there were a large number of crowds, particularly the beginning part and the incident, but I don't have a visual or a memory at that moment in time in terms of the size or nature of the crowd at Grenfell Tower at that moment.
If you go back to tab 23, which is the short incident log, and go to page 17, this is 5 or 6 minutes or so earlier. So we're still at make pumps 10, in fact. So even though it's a short period of time, it's a lot of pumps earlier. You see at 01:25:08 on page 17. Key EMG G271 request police for crowd control. What's EMG? Do you know?
I can only, I'm not 100% clear on this, but that may be that we've sent a priority from the fire ground into control, and that denotes that that's a priority message.
Priority message?
Yeah.
Okay. And it says request police for crowd control. Do you remember asking for police crowd control?
I do remember at some point during the incident I requested that, yeah.
And do you remember why you asked for that?
As I mentioned, you know, at points and through the incident, there were a large number of, you know, Grenfell Tower is located within Lancaster West Estate. It's a large residential area, and that request for police would have been to assist, you know, people trying to make their way or to Grenfell Tower because of the scale of the incident.
Do you remember what the crowd was trying to do?
I don't have any clear memory of specifics in terms of what that crowd were trying to achieve, no.
Do you remember whether they were trying to get back into the building to rescue loved ones?
I can't remember if that was occurring at that moment in time, no.
No. Now, you mentioned bollards and the aerial ladder, and Charlie Batterby's role in that. Can you just help me? The bollards were up. Would they require a key or some kind of code to lower them so as to get the aerial ladder in?
From my memory, the ones at Grenfell were a fixed bollard. They weren't an automated system, so I don't know how Charlie did it, if I'm honest, but I did task him to remove the bollards, and how generally we have a set of keys on every frontline pumping appliance that will, a generic set of keys that will allow us to remove these fixed bollards. There'll be a locking mechanism on the bollards, remove that, and that will allow you to move them from ground.
Do you remember any particular difficulties with removing the bollards?
Not that I can remember, no.
Now, you mentioned the aerial ladder arriving, and we have a time for that in the short incident log as 1:32:07. You don't need to turn that up. In fact, forgive me, I'm wrong. It's in the response report as 01:32:07. Would that be about right in terms of your recollection, that the first aerial ladder arrived just after you'd made pumps 25, or about the same time?
Again, I don't have a grasp on the concept of time, but referring back to the ROPS report and the vision system, then that time would be correct, yes.
And do you remember that Dan Harriman, who was the crew manager of A213, asked you whether you wanted the aerial to perform rescue or to provide water?
Yes, I do.
You say that in your statement. Is this right, that you realised that he thought that using it for rescue was a realistic option?
So can you repeat that?
Yeah, let me put it a different way. It wasn't a good question. Did you think that using the aerial ladder for rescue was a realistic option at that point?
I remember being asking, he presented himself to me, he asked, Mike, what do you want the aerial for? Rescues or water? And to that I replied, water. So,
and if you go to page 8 of your statement, and look at the middle paragraph, if we can have that, please. This is where you deal with the arrival of A213 from Paddington. You say that, as you can see, shortly after that, the aerial appliance from Paddington A213 attended, and at that point the fire was rapidly developing. It was at roof level and was developing even more on the east side of the block. It had become even more intense and debris was continuing to fall. And then you say the crew manager in charge of A213, Dan Harriman, presented himself to me and asked whether I needed him to perform rescues or provide water. A213 is a TL, that's turntable ladder, isn't it?
Correct.
And then you say, I told him that I needed the aerial appliance to stop the fire that was spreading on the east side of the block. Now, I've read that all out to you because I've got a number of questions about different parts of that. What did you think about how realistic his rescue option was?
At that moment in time, I can't recall that I considered I wanted the TL for rescue purposes. And on the external, I was more concerned about the spread of the fire.
Was it possible at that point to use the turntable ladder from Paddington as a means of rescuing occupants of the building?
Again, it's a difficult question to answer because that's a hypothetical question, and without putting myself back there, remembering every single detail and everything else, that's a difficult decision. I wouldn't like to comment on that.
Can you just help me? A turntable ladder goes up, I think, to, is this right, 32 metres or so?
Approximately 10 floors.
And that was my next question. So you could have gone up to 10 floors. Does that mean you couldn't have got any higher, even if you had decided to use it for rescue?
That's the maximum reach, yes, correct.
That's the maximum reach. And you say in the last sentence, I told him that I needed the aerial appliance to stop the fire that was spreading on the east side of the block. Earlier on, you say that it was at roof level. So my question is, how did you think that the aerial ladder would stop the fire, given that it had arrived at roof level?
For me as unit commander at that moment in time, I had that resource in attendance, and I had to use it to the best of its ability, again, for my professional obligation to try and extinguish that fire on the external of the building.
Now, you said a minute ago the reach of an aerial of a TL, a turntable ladder, is 32 metres or so. How high, if you attached a hose to the platform, how high could you get water above the 32 metres if you decided to use it for exterior firefighting?
The TL, it has a monitor, a branch, for want of a better word, at the top and the cage area. I'm not based at an aerial station. However, so 10 floors, for my mind, maybe potentially another 4 to 5 floors beyond that 10 metre distance, 10 floor distance.
So did you think at all that the aerial ladder would help you get water to the top of the building where the fire had arrived?
I don't remember that being a conscious thought but from the brief that I gave to the FRU crew previously, you know, I had a kind of plan to try and get some water onto the fire from on top of the roof to the top of the fire.
Could you be showing the top of page 9 of your statement, please? And you're talking about the aerial appliance. And you say in the third line, A213, we're now putting water onto the tower. And by this time, about 40% of the east side was alight, from the 4th floor up to the roof level. Now, we have a photograph of that. Before I show it to you, Mr. Dunn, can I just ask you whether you are all right to be shown a photograph of Grenfell Tower on the night? It's not a video, it's just a still photograph.
That's okay.
Is that okay?
Yep.
I mean, if not, and you look at it and you want a break, tell me.
No, it's fine.
Okay, all right. It's bundle 25, tab 25, and it's BLAR. And then there are 6 zeros, and then 12, 1, 2. Right. It should be one. That may be my preferred. This is should be page 12 in that. There it is. No, that's not it. Page 12.
Next one.
Actually, that will do for present purposes. Now, that's a photograph. You can ignore the report in which it sits. It's an expert's report of Barbara Lane, and it's figure 1711. She has timed this photograph at 1:52 on the 14th of June, 2017. And you'll see that she's put on it level 9, which shows you where level 9 is, and put a red ring around the hose stream. The only reason I show you that is the timing, and to ask you about the timing. Would that be about right, that by 1:52 the aerial appliance was applying water to the east elevation?
As that image shows, that's correct.
Okay. So it arrived at 1:32 and was operating by 1:52. From your recollection, obviously that's 20 minutes, but from your recollection, how soon after arrival did the turntable ladder from Paddington start applying water to the east elevation?
I wouldn't be able to give you a time. What I would be able to explain is why it takes time for that to happen. Any aerial appliance doesn't come with its own water supply. I think I spoke about earlier that Gulf 271 was supplying the dry rising main. We have to have a separate fire appliance to then find an additional hydrant. So that has to be facilitated by a crew on the ground. They then find an additional water supply in terms of a hydrant. That will then plugged in by hose into a pumping appliance. That pumping appliance will be alone dedicated to supplying water to the aerial via our fire brigade hose. Only when that can happen, we can confirm the water supply to the aerial, can we apply water onto the fire. So it's not as if as soon as the aerial is in attendance, we can use that for water.
And how long roughly would it take between setting in the hose for the aerial appliance and first starting to apply water?
It's difficult to say. It depends on nearest available hydrant, getting access in for the aerial. Up to a maximum of 10 minutes, potentially, I don't know. It's difficult to judge.
Do you remember how far away the hydrant was from the east face into which the turntable ladder set its hose?
Not at that point when I was at the incident, but since post-incident, I understand that they had difficulty sourcing a hydrant.
Can you? Okay, you say you understand it. Who would I talk to get more detail on the difficulties they had that you've just referred to?
I believe crew manager Dave Davis and crew manager Charlie Batterby were involved in that process at some point.
So Charlie Batterby was involved?
I believe he was, but I can't guarantee that.
No, of course not. How would you describe the success of the firefighting on the east elevation with the aerial ladder once it was working?
I would say the aerial appliance was doing its best it possibly could in almost an impossible situation.
Did you know that it was withdrawn at about 2:20 a.m. after you were incident commander?
The first time I was aware that it was withdrawn was when I was relieved of my command. I went into Grenfell Tower itself, and the first time I knew it was withdrawn was when I left the incident ground at approximately 0800 or 8:30 hours.
Do you happen to know why the aerial appliance was withdrawn?
From my understanding, it was the appliance itself was compromised in terms of material falling from the building.
Right. And I'm sorry to ask you this, but who would I talk to if I wanted to know more detail about that? About the withdrawal?
The best person to speak to, I believe, would be crew manager Dan Harriman, who was the officer in charge of Alpha 213.
Yes, thank you. Can I now, I should be able to cover this before the next break, Mr. Chairman, just ask you some questions about the spread of the fire to the north face of the building. Now, on page 7 of your statement, you say that crew manager Ash of G34 Chelsea was telling you that debris was falling on the north side of the tower. And I may have given you a bad reference. Never mind the statement for the moment. Do you remember crew manager Ash telling you that debris was falling on the north side of the tower?
I do remember receiving information, yes.
Did you tell anybody present to relocate to the north side of the tower to stop the fire that was spreading?
At that point, I believe I detailed that task to Watch Manager James Berry, who was a Watch Manager officer in charge of Richmond's pump ladder.
And if you look at page 9 of your statement, which is where I was intending to go, you can see about a third of the way down the page, you say, crew manager Nathan Ash of G34 Chelsea informed me via his radio that debris was falling on the north side of the building. So now I knew that the fire was wrapping around the building to the north side. Did you have any thoughts about how this fire was wrapping itself around the building to the north?
I don't remember having any thoughts about how it was doing it. I could just bear witness to it was unfolding in front of my eyes.
Right, and he tells you it's wrapping around the building. Where were you standing at the time of that conversation?
From my memory, I was more so on the on that grassy verge or hill that's still on the eastern elevation of Grenfell Tower.
Right. And do you know where crew manager Ash was standing or located when he sent you his radio message about the fire spread to the north?
I don't know.
And you go on to say that I instructed Watch Manager James Berry from Richmond H42 to take his appliance and relocate to the north side of the tower to stop the fire from spreading and to put out the debris that was alight. Now, can I just ask you to look at your contemporaneous notes that you made on Saturday the 17th of June, so after the event, which you'll find in your witness bundle. It should be on your table at tab 1B. And it's on the screen, so you can look at the screen version. If you go to, Mr. Trial Director, you could go to the one for Saturday the 17th of June 2017. It's got an 11 in the top right-hand corner. That's the one. Now,
well, just a minute. I've got a paper copy, but the copy on my screen is virtually illegible. What can you read, Mr. Dowden, first of all? You may have...
No, I can read that.
Has he got a paper copy as well?
he should have a paper copy.
In that
Mr.
blue
Chairman.
folder, you may find that there's a copy of your statement. And is there a tab B?
Yes.
Well, I think you'll find it easier to use that. You've got to move on quite a long way towards the end. It's the last but one page.
Yes, it's got an 11 at the top right-hand corner in a circle.
Yeah.
Got that? Yes.
It's also on the big screens at the back of the...
I don't know who else is trying to read this on a small screen. I doubt that we can do much better than we've got. So I think you'll have to crane your neck to see the large one. I'm sorry about that.
I've just got a very short, simple question, Mr. Dowden, on this, and then we'll have a break. In the second half of that written document, you say I had reports from crew manager Nathan Ash, Chelsea, that debris from the block was planing down and landing beyond the fence line on the east side of the block. Do you see that?
That's correct.
And then you say, I detailed Watch Manager James Barry, H42, Richmond's pump ladder, to get an appliance, if possible, to this location, as I was concerned about it spreading to the surrounding properties on the eastern side of the block beyond the fence line. I just want to just ask you whether, in fact, when you say in your statement, north side, you actually meant east side, as this document records.
My orientation in the building was had changed. I wasn't aware that. So the brief I gave to Watch Manager James Berry was to relocate to the north side, but in the contemporaneous notes that's incorrect. It should read north side.
Right. Okay. I did promise a break after this document, so it would be wrong of me not to.
Well, unless you've got something very short to follow up with, which will finish the line of questioning.
It won't quite.
Right, and we'll have our break anyway. Mr. Dowden, we'll have another break at this point, and I think probably everyone would benefit from having a slightly longer break. So we'll resume at midday by that clock.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. like to carry on, Mr. Dowden?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Dowden, I'm going to turn to a different topic altogether, which is communications. Can I ask you a general question? If you, as the incident commander, or anybody else as incident commander, wish to communicate with all the residents in a high-rise block at the same time, is there any other way of doing it other than through the established systems of communication via the bridgehead and by BA wearers?
It would be very, very difficult to communicate with every single resident of a block the size of Grenfell Tower. We can have the ability to communicate from the ground. We have loudhailers. You know, an incident like Grenfell Tower, there was a lot of noise pollution and background noise and everything else that may be quite difficult to do.
In your experience, have you ever attended an incident in a high-rise block which had an internal tannoy system or loudspeaker system which allowed the incident commander to communicate with everybody inside the building?
Not from my memory, no.
Now I'm going to show you, or at least ask you, very briefly about a number of policy statements and requirements about the incident commander's responsibility for communications. Are you familiar with high-rise firefighting 633 and the part of that which says that regular communication should be maintained to ensure that the incident commander is aware of the developing situation?
Yes.
You are. Would you like to see it in black and white, or are you happy to go on your recollection of what the policy says?
Yeah, to see it would be good to refresh the memory, please.
Sure. If you could go to Policy Bundle tab 4. And go in that, please, to paragraph 7.26. Which is on page 11 of 28. Regular communications should be maintained to ensure that the IC is aware of the developing situation and can anticipate resource requirements effectively. And it goes on, this also ensures the fire sector commander is kept updated regarding any fire and smoke spread that may only be visible to those outside the building. So at Grenfell on the night, were you aware of that as a policy requirement?
Yes.
Now we're going to go back into 633, I think, at some stage, depending on how we get on. But can I show you another policy, which is policy 488. This is an LFB policy. Are you familiar with policy 488, incident communications?
I would have some familiarisation with it, yes.
Yes, okay. It's tab 12 and it's LFB 50736, Mr. Trump Director. And this is the one that is current as of May 2016. Can I ask you to look at paragraph 1.1 on page 2 internally? And it says, effective communications are the key to success. A reliable communications network is essential for safe operation at incidents and fundamental for securing the level of command required to manage operational resources efficiently. This policy procedure aims to standardise, simplify and improve the setting up of a communications network at an incident. So question, on the night, were you aware that this was a policy requirement or policy principle?
Yeah, most incident commanders are aware that effective communication is a key part of an incident.
And then finally, in this short survey of policies, are you familiar with policy 431? This is a London Fire Brigade policy. Policy 431, incident commander.
Yes.
And if you look at the tab before, tab 11, we've looked at this before, yesterday, I think, Mr. Dowden. If I can ask you to go in that to paragraph 7.1, which we haven't looked at, under the heading Communications. It's on page 5 of 10, internally. If that could be enlarged. It says at 7.1, the IC will establish clear lines of communication throughout the incident using the most appropriate communications method available. On the night of the fire, were you conscious that that was a policy principle?
Yep. Yes, I was.
And 7.2 and 7.3, same question. 7.2, the IC will ensure that communications are maintained between the incident and the brigade's mobilising control. Again, same question. Were you aware on the night of the fire that that was a policy requirement or principle?
Yes.
And then 7.3, the IC should establish and maintain effective communications with all other services and agencies that can contribute both to resolving an incident and the effective coordination of activities. Again, on the night, were you cognizant, were you conscious that that was a policy requirement or principle?
Yeah, I am familiar with that policy, but it is difficult to actually pinpoint every single detail of every single policy. But, you know, again, I will refer back to the incident commander, understands that having effective communications is very important in any incident.
And if I can ask you finally to look at Appendix 2 on page 7 internally. Considerations for the role of incident commander. And it says at the top, the IC should ensure the following. And there's a list of things. Establish and maintain information regarding the number of casualties involved. You see at the top. Establish, under the words in bold, information about task or event. Do you see it says, establish and maintain information regarding number of casualties involved, development and progress of the operations, effect of the incident and of fire service operations to the surrounding environment. On the night of the fire, were you aware that those considerations were considerations that you, as incident commander, should keep in mind?
That's something I have an awareness of, because that's relating back to the decision-making model process.
Okay. In the light of the position as set out in the parts of the policies I've shown you, which I appreciate is only a very small part of these much bigger policies, and there may well be other parts of the policy that we would need to look at together, but I'm trying to take this in a focused way. In the light of the position in the policies that we've seen, can we talk together about how it worked or didn't work by reference to communications about what was happening, first of all, inside the building, up to at about 1:30. So we're looking at communications between you and the people inside the building, your crews inside the building, up to about 1:30 a.m. First question is, do you recall receiving any information either from or about firefighter O'Byrne and his visit to the higher floors above the 4th floor?
I believe that's something that was discussed yesterday, and I don't remember receiving that traffic from firefighter O'Byrne, no.
So you don't remember any discussion with firefighter O'Byrne about what he was finding on the 5th, 6th and 7th floors?
Not when I was incident commander on the outside of the building, no.
Did anybody tell you at that time that firefighter O'Byrne had gone up higher into the building and what he had found?
Not throughout the duration of that incident. That's only something that became apparent post-incident.
So if I was to ask you questions about what firefighter O'Byrne found when he went up higher into the building and the people that he met Would you be able to answer them?
No.
Firefighter Secret. Firefighter Secret says in his statement that he did hear messages from firefighter O'Byrne reporting internal fires on the 6th and the 7th floors, and had heard a radio message from him. Is that something that Mr. Secret passed on to you? Firefighter Secret passed on to you? Do you remember?
Is it crew manager secret or
Crew manager Secret.
crew manager secret? Again, that relates back into the information that the firefighter O'Byrne had, and from when I was incident commander on the external of the building, I don't remember receiving that traffic.
So if I was to ask you questions about what firefighter crew manager Secret himself found inside the building, would you be able to answer them?
The only questions that I would be able to answer is these questions that have been posed already in terms of the traffic between myself and crew manager Chris Secret, in terms of the confusion, in terms of the escalating fire development on the external of the building, and the progress of the initial firefighting crew into the compartment at flat 16.
Did crew manager Secret tell you that firefighter Stern and Hippel looked spooked and thought there was something amiss, something wrong? Did crew manager Secret tell you that?
I've not received that information, no.
Are you sure about that, or is it that you just can't remember?
I'm fairly confident that I have not received that information.
Turning to firefighter Hippel, do you recall getting any communications about what he was finding from his own visits to the higher floors in the tower at about that time of the night?
I don't remember receiving any traffic or information, but I must refer back to say that these are individual accounts from individual people, and they are their true reflection of what's happened, and I can only be true to what I understand and what I remember from that night.
Did he, or do you recall him telling you that he had found black smoke on the 16th floor?
In respect, in terms of telling me, would that be a face-to-face or by radio traffic?
Either way.
I have no recollection of if it was a face-to-face conversation, whether it was a radio traffic received.
He says, Mr. Hippel, firefighter Hippel, says in his statement, and we'll obviously have to explore this with him, but he says that he had expressed deep concern to Watch Manager O'Keefe at the bridgehead at this time, and my question is, did Watch Manager O'Keefe pass those concerns on to you?
Again, I can't recall receiving the concerns were passed to myself, but again, that's not saying that that's not a true reflection of his account. I can only comment on what I recollect from that evening.
And turning to another firefighter Stern, and again we'll have to examine what he says about this carefully, but he says, or will say, that he discovered smoke on all floors but zero visibility on floor 16. Do you remember that information being passed back to you either by him, firefighter Stern, or indirectly through the bridgehead?
No.
What mechanisms of communication did you have up to 1:30 a.m. between yourself on the ground and the individual firefighters in the building?
So the mechanisms for that would be that, as me as the incident commander, I would designate that an officer would be at the bridgehead. All BA wearers committed would be committed, and they would have to observe BA radio channel 6, and that would be observed by an entry control officer, and that is a firefighter in charge of committing firefighters past the point of entry control. All radio traffic from BA teams should be either received back to entry control, either to the entry control operator, or to, if the resources permit, a comms communications officer, and that can be a rank of a firefighter. So from my expectation as a commander, that's how traffic from BA crews or people within a compartment, not just specific to Grenfell Tower, would communicate to the entry control point, and in terms of Grenfell Tower, at the bridgehead, and that information via Channel 1 from the bridgehead would be passed to the incident commander.
So, to summarise your evidence, is this right, that you didn't actually have direct radio control with individual firefighters inside the tower? Your communications would go through the bridgehead?
That's how the command structure should work, that's correct.
And was there any way of changing that so that you could communicate directly with firefighters on different floors within the building?
That's something that potentially could be facilitated, or if they individually take the initiative to change the channel, but I'm not going to comment on that because that's something that I didn't order or direct to do. I was observing Channel 1 as the incident commander.
So would it be a question of simply changing the channel so that they could speak on Channel 1 as opposed to Channel 6? Or would you need a different piece of equipment?
No, it's all facilitated by every individual who was on that fireground will have access to their own personal issue fireground radio. But as in policy, firefighters who are committed under air in BA should be observing BA Channel 6.
Right. What if they were committed but weren't under air? What would they have with them?
They would have their fireground radio.
And that would be tuned to Channel 1?
That would be on Channel 1, that's correct, yes.
And they could use that to speak to you directly, could they?
They would be able to, yes.
Yeah. But if they were under air, wearing the mask and the full kit, what radio equipment would they have?
They would have, again, they'd have the personal issue fireground radio, but they'd also, not always the case, but we do have a facility in the London Fire Brigade that we can put communications equipment onto breathing apparatus sets.
Is that a BARI?
That's correct.
What does BARI stand for?
Breathing apparatus radio interface equipment.
In your experience, is it effective or are there problems with it?
There can be issues with our BARI sets, that's correct, yes.
What kind of issues?
Loss of traffic, loss of traffic, then it can be unreliable.
On the night of the fire, was the fact that, as you say, BARI radios could be unreliable something that you thought was quite well known in the London Fire Brigade, or was that just your opinion?
I think it is well known within the London Fire Brigade that the BARI communications equipment is unreliable, yes.
Did you ever take that up with anybody more senior? The BARI radios were unreliable?
I believe that has been raised, and I certainly did raise that point. Not only that point, but I did raise the point of communications at the PRC. Yes, I did.
So is it right, to summarise, that by 1:30 you hadn't had any direct communication with any firefighter who'd gone into the building, whether they were under air or not?
From my memory and my recollection, that is correct. I'm not saying that that's not the case. Whether there was a communication, I'm not going to speculate, but from my memory and my recollection, that is the case. But for those individuals who put that in a statement, then that's a true reflection.
Can I just turn to another part of the same topic, which is communication with the bridgehead that you had, Mr. Dowden. You say in your statement that Watch Manager O'Keefe arrived at the bridgehead, and you sent him to the bridgehead and to liaise with Crew Manager Secret. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you asked him to manage the BA resources, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah. I just want to explore with you how much of what Mr. O'Keefe says he discovered once he was at the bridgehead was actually relayed back to you. If you go, first of all, to page 6 of your own statement and look at the second paragraph, you set out there what information you had from Mr. O'Keefe. And you say, between 0125 and 128, we looked at this yesterday, we had reports of one person not being able to leave the property on the 11th floor, another on the 16th floor. And you go on to give the reason, and we looked at that yesterday, so I won't ask you about that again. My question is that the only information you got from Mr. O'Keefe, from Watch Manager O'Keefe, at those between those times?
I'm not saying that other traffic wasn't received by myself, but that's a piece of traffic that I do really remember receiving from Watch Manager O'Keefe.
Did Watch Manager O'Keefe tell you that there was light grey smoke logging in the ground floor lobby at any time?
I don't recall that, no.
Do you remember whether Watch Manager O'Keefe told you that firefighter Jamal Stern had told him that the lobbies of floors 5 and 6 were completely smoked out? Do you remember being told that by Mr.
No, I don't.
Okay. Do you remember being told by Watch Manager O'Keefe that he had seen residents coming down the stairs with soot on their faces?
No, I don't.
And what about him telling you that he'd seen significant smoke in the main stairwell? Do you remember him telling you that?
No, I don't.
And what about smoke logging at the bridgehead itself on the second floor? Did he tell you that?
I don't remember receiving any traffic to that effect, no.
It sounds from what you've been telling us that, to the best of your recollection, you got very little traffic from Watch Manager O'Keefe at the bridgehead up to 1:30 a.m. Is that right?
I think what we have to try and remember is that, again, I'll try and explain that from when I was in charge of the incident for that first hour, I felt extremely under pressure. I do have some real black spots and memory blanks in terms of chronological order of events, what actually happened. Now, I'm not going to discredit anyone in terms of their statement. That's not for me to do. And if that's their account and that's their understanding of a version of events, then I can only, that's a true reflection. But I can only stand here, be honest, and give an account of what I remember.
I know, that's very fair. But Mr. Dowden, I think you might need another break. Is that all right? Or
yes.
Are you able to answer a few more questions?
No, I'm happy to carry on.
Just a few more questions.
That's fine.
Okay. Same theme. Mr. O'Keefe has recorded in his contemporaneous notes that firefighters Stern and Hippel had reported to him going to the 16th floor to rescue 2 persons in smoke. Do you remember being told that by Watch Manager O'Keefe?
I don't, no.
I'm sorry to ask you the similar sort of question in respect of other people on different floors. He has a record or recollection of firefighters Murphy and Cornelius reporting to him that they were going to the 14th floor and finding numerous people in heavy smoke. Do you remember being told that by Watch Manager O'Keefe?
No. But what I would like to add is I know Brian O'Keefe was under some significant pressure on that bridgehead.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Dowden, I think...
And he did an amazing job.
Yeah. Mr. Dowden, thank you very much. I'm going to invite you to take a break, I think.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, of course we'll have a break if you feel the need for one. Would you like a break now? Well,
Yeah.
before you answer that, let me just ask Mr. Millett, what's the shape of the rest of the morning, so to speak, with the lunch agenda coming up?
I think that from Mr. Dowden's point of view, it may be, I can't speak for him, but it may be helpful if he had a lunch break now and knew it was a lunch break and that he could take a significant break.
Yes.
We don't have a vast amount of ground to cover after that.
Well, now, if we were to adjourn now and take a long lunch break and resume at 2 o'clock, how would that affect your programme for the rest of the day?
That would be perfectly workable, Mr. Chairman.
Right, and that would not prevent you from reaching the end of your questioning well within the usual day, I hope.
No.
Right.
Subject to anything unusual arising.
Well, of course, one never knows. Okay. Well, maybe that answers everyone's question, Mr. Dowden. We could stop now for lunch and give you a long break, come back at 2 o'clock. Would that be all right?
That's fine, thank you.
And you heard what Mr. Millett said. He should be able to finish asking you questions well within the course of the afternoon.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Would you like to go now?